Mason Reed stands in the prison yard, his world shattering as Tyler, the man who promised protection, shakes hands with someone Mason has only heard whispered about in fearful tones. Dante Mercer, the name that makes even the guards nervous. And Mason just became part of a deal he never agreed to. Before we dive in, comment where in the world you are watching from and don't forget to click subscribe. Mason Reed had been inside Wardlow Correctional for exactly 47 days when he learned that promises meant nothing behind these walls. He was 23, blonde, pale-skinned, and so terrified during his first week that he'd barely slept. The conviction had been a nightmare: wrong place, wrong time, wrong friends. 3 years for accessory to theft. 3 years that might as well have been a lifetime in a place like this. Tyler Kovac had approached him on day 3. Tall, muscular, covered in ink that told stories Mason didn't want to know. Tyler ran things on the north side of C Block, and everyone knew it. The guards knew it. The warden probably knew it. But knowing and doing something about it were two different things. "You need protection, pretty boy," Tyler had said, not unkindly. His pale blue eyes had assessed Mason with the practiced ease of someone who knew exactly what he was looking at. "Place like this, someone like you won't last a month without the right people watching your back." Mason had been too scared to say no, too naive to ask what protection would cost. For 6 weeks it had seemed simple enough. Stay close to Tyler's crew. Sit at their table during meals. Keep his head down and his mouth shut. Do small favors, carry messages, hold items he didn't ask about, look the other way when things happened that made his stomach turn. Tyler never touched him, never demanded anything physical. And Mason had been so grateful for that mercy that he'd never questioned what Tyler was actually getting out of the arrangement. Until today, the yard was crowded, the autumn sun doing little to warm the concrete and razor wire. Mason had been walking the perimeter with 2 of Tyler's guys, Marcus and Jake, when he'd seen Tyler standing by the weight benches with someone Mason had never seen up close before. Dante Mercer. Everyone knew who Dante Mercer was. He ran the south side, the east block, and had connections that reached beyond these walls into places Mason couldn't imagine. He was tall, at least 6'4", with deep brown skin, a shaved head, and a presence that made everyone around him seem smaller. Even from a distance, Mason had always felt the weight of his authority. Dante wore the same prison blues as everyone else, but somehow they looked different on him. Like a king wearing peasant clothes who still commanded respect through sheer force of will. Mason had heard the stories. Dante had killed a man with his bare hands. Dante controlled the drug flow into 3 prisons. Dante had politicians in his pocket. Whether any of it was true didn't matter. What mattered was that people believed it, and belief was power in a place like this. The stories had started Mason's first week. His cellmate at the time, a nervous man named Eddie, serving 2 years for fraud, had whispered them late at night when the lights went out and the prison transformed into something even more menacing. "Stay away from the south wing," Eddie had warned, his voice barely audible over the sounds of the prison settling. "That's Mercer's territory. He don't take kindly to people who don't belong there." "What did he do?" Mason had asked, morbidly curious despite his fear. "To get in here, I mean?" Eddie had gone quiet for a long moment. "Nobody really knows for sure. Some say murder. Some say it was bigger than that: organized crime, racketeering, the kind of charges that come with federal attention. But what matters ain't what got him in here. It's what he's built since he arrived." "What do you mean?" "He came in 7 years ago. Within 6 months, he'd taken over half the prison economy. Within a year, he controlled everything that mattered: contraband, protection, information. The guards leave him alone because he keeps order better than they ever could. And the warden..." Eddie had laughed, a bitter sound. "The warden knows that if Mercer wanted chaos, this whole place would burn. So they have an understanding. Mercer keeps the peace, and they let him run his kingdom." Mason had pulled his thin blanket tighter around himself. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you got that look," Eddie had said. "That scared, lost look that draws attention. And in here, attention is the last thing you want, especially from men like Mercer." But now, 6 weeks later, Mason had all of Dante Mercer's attention, and there was nothing he could do about it. "Tyler wants you," Marcus said suddenly, jerking his head toward the weight benches. Mason's stomach dropped. "Why?" "Didn't ask. Don't care. Move." The walk across the yard felt like miles. Other inmates watched with expressions ranging from curiosity to something that looked uncomfortably like pity. Mason's legs felt weak, his pulse hammering in his throat. He tried to read the situation as he approached. Tyler's body language was relaxed, almost celebratory. Dante's was harder to interpret. He stood with his arms crossed, his expression neutral, but there was an intensity in his gaze as he watched Mason approach that made Mason's skin prickle with awareness. When he reached Tyler and Dante, both men turned to look at him with expressions that made Mason want to run. Tyler smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Mason, come here." Mason stepped closer, hyper-aware of Dante's dark gaze tracking his every movement. Up close, Dante was even more intimidating, broad-shouldered, heavily muscled, with hands that looked like they could break bones without effort. His face was handsome in a harsh way, all strong lines and sharp angles, with eyes that seemed to see right through every wall Mason had tried to build. There was a scar above Dante's left eyebrow, faint but visible, and another along his jawline. Evidence of violence, of survival. His arms, visible beneath his rolled-up sleeves, were corded with muscle and marked with tattoos that looked like they told stories Mason wasn't sure he wanted to understand. "This him?" Dante's voice was deep, resonant, with an edge that suggested violence was always just beneath the surface. "Yeah, Mason Reed. Been with me 6 weeks now." Tyler clapped Mason on the shoulder with false camaraderie. "Good kid. Keeps his head down. Does what he's told." Mason's throat went dry. "Tyler, what's—" "Quiet," Tyler said, still smiling. "The grown-ups are talking." Dante circled Mason slowly, and Mason forced himself to stand still even though every instinct screamed at him to bolt. He could feel Dante's gaze like a physical touch, assessing, measuring, deciding. The air felt thick, charged with something Mason couldn't name. Other inmates in the yard had noticed what was happening now. Conversations had stopped. People were watching, waiting to see what would unfold. "He looks scared," Dante observed, his voice carrying just enough that nearby inmates could hear. "He is scared," Tyler agreed. "But that's what you wanted, right? Someone who won't cause problems. Someone who'll be grateful for the right kind of attention." Mason's blood turned to ice as understanding crashed over him. This wasn't about protection anymore. This was about property. About a transaction. "Tyler, you said," Mason started, his voice shaking. "I said I'd keep you safe," Tyler interrupted. "And I have. For 6 weeks. Nobody touched you. Nobody hurt you. But protection costs, Mason. You didn't really think it was free, did you?" Mason's mind raced back through the past 6 weeks, looking for signs he'd missed. The way Tyler's crew had always kept him separate from the others. The way they'd discouraged him from making friends outside their group. The way Tyler had asked detailed questions about Mason's past, his experience, his life before prison. He'd been so grateful for the protection that he'd never seen it for what it was, an investment. Tyler had been keeping him safe, keeping him isolated, keeping him valuable for exactly this moment. "You're selling me?" The words came out as a whisper, disbelief and betrayal warring in Mason's chest. "Transferring your protection arrangement," Tyler corrected smoothly. "Dante here needs someone, and I need what he's offering in return. Business, kid, nothing personal." "What could possibly be worth this?" Mason asked, his voice breaking. "What did he give you that's worth selling another human being?" Tyler's smile widened. "That's between me and Mercer. But let's just say it's enough that I won't have to worry about competition on my side of the prison for a very long time." Dante had stopped circling and now stood directly in front of Mason, close enough that Mason had to tilt his head back to meet his eyes. The height difference was substantial. Mason was average height, but Dante towered over him. This close, Mason could see details he'd missed from a distance. The way Dante's jaw clenched slightly, as if he was controlling some emotion. The intelligence in those dark eyes, sharp and assessing. The faint smell of soap and something else, something warm and masculine that made Mason's breath catch for reasons he didn't want to examine. "You have a say in this," Dante said, and his voice was surprisingly calm. "You can walk away right now. Tell Tyler to go to hell. Take your chances on your own." Hope flared in Mason's chest. "Really?" "Really," Dante confirmed. "But understand what that means. Tyler's protection ends the second you refuse. And everyone in this yard will know you're unaffiliated within an hour. You're young, you're pretty, and you're clearly terrified. How long do you think you'll last?" Mason's hope crumbled. He looked around the yard at the men watching with predatory interest, at the guards who were too far away to help even if they cared, at the high walls that trapped him in this nightmare. One man in particular caught Mason's attention, someone he'd seen watching him before during yard time. Older, with cold eyes and a smile that made Mason's skin crawl. That man was watching this transaction with obvious interest, and the look on his face suggested he was already calculating how to take advantage if Mason became unprotected. "That's what I thought," Dante said softly, reading Mason's expression. "So here's the deal. You come with me. You're under my protection now. Nobody touches you without my permission. Nobody hurts you. You do what I tell you, when I tell you, and you'll be safer than you've ever been in this place. And if I don't do what you tell me?" Mason asked, hating how small his voice sounded. Dante's lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. Then we'll have a problem. And you don't want problems with me, Mason Reed. The way Dante said his name low and deliberate sent a shiver down Mason's spine that he couldn't quite identify. Fear, certainly, but something else too. Something that confused him even more than the fear. There was an intimacy in the way Dante spoke his name, like he'd already claimed it. Already claimed him. I don't have a choice, do I? Mason said quietly. Everyone has choices, Dante replied. Some just have better options than others. Tyler was watching this exchange with barely concealed impatience. So we good? Dante extended his hand to Tyler, and they shook a deal sealed with Mason as the commodity being exchanged. Mason felt sick, but he also noticed something in the handshake. It was brief, almost dismissive. Dante's attention was already back on Mason before Tyler had even let go. There was something in Dante's expression, not quite possessiveness, but something close to it. Something that suggested this transaction meant more to him than he was letting on. Pleasure doing business, Tyler said cheerfully, already turning away. He's all yours, Mercer. Good luck with him. I won't need luck, Dante said, and there was something in his tone that made Tyler pause and glance back. The two men locked eyes for a moment, and something passed between them, some understanding or warning that Mason couldn't interpret. Then Tyler nodded once and walked away, his crew following like satellites orbiting a dying star. And just like that, Mason's entire world shifted. Dante placed a hand on Mason's shoulder, not rough, but firm enough to make his ownership clear. The touch was warm, heavy, undeniable. Mason could feel the strength in those fingers even through his prison shirt. Come on, Dante said. Let me show you where you'll be sleeping now. Mason let himself be guided across the yard, acutely aware of every eye following them. The whisper started immediately, spreading like wildfire. By dinner, everyone would know. Mason Reed belonged to Dante Mercer now. As they walked, Dante kept his hand on Mason's shoulder. The gesture was possessive, yes, but there was also something protective about it. Other inmates gave them a wide berth, and more than one looked away quickly when Dante's gaze swept over them. Head up, Dante said quietly, for Mason's ears only. You look like a victim, you'll be treated like one. Even with my protection, you need to show strength. Mason tried to straighten his shoulders, lift his chin. It felt like a lie. He didn't feel strong. He felt terrified and powerless and utterly lost. Better, Dante said, and was that approval in his voice? You'll learn. They walked through corridors Mason had never accessed before, deeper into the prison's south wing. The guards here nodded to Dante with respect that bordered on deference. Whatever power Dante held, it was real and recognized even by the people supposedly in charge. One guard, a younger man with red hair and nervous eyes, actually stepped aside and unlocked a gate without Dante having to say a word. Mr. Mercer, the guard said with a nod. Collins, Dante replied, his tone neutral but not unkind. The deference was striking. This wasn't fear exactly, it was something more complex. Respect mixed with understanding. These guards knew that Dante kept order in a way they never could. They passed through another corridor where the cells looked slightly different, still institutional, still prison, but somehow better maintained. The walls were cleaner. There was less graffiti. Even the air smelled less oppressive. This is my wing, Dante explained as they walked. I control who lives here, who works here, what happens here. You're safe in this space in a way you weren't before. They stopped at a cell that was larger than the one Mason had been sharing with two other inmates. This one had only 2 bunks, and the bottom one was clearly occupied. Personal items, photos, a level of comfort that seemed impossible in prison. There were books stacked neatly on a small shelf, a chess set on a makeshift table, even a radio, which had to be contraband but was sitting out in plain view. The cell had the feeling of a space that someone actually lived in rather than just survived in. You'll take the top bunk, Dante said, leaning against the cell door frame. Your stuff will be moved here by this evening. My cellmate got transferred yesterday, so the timing works out. Mason stared at the cell, at the space that would be his new home, and felt the reality of his situation settling over him like a weight. You're my cellmate now? I am. And what do you expect from me? Dante studied him for a long moment, those dark eyes unreadable. Right now? I expect you to breathe. You look like you're about to pass out. Mason realized he'd been holding his breath and forced himself to exhale. His hands were shaking so badly he had to clasp them together. Sit down before you fall down, Dante commanded, gesturing to the bottom bunk. Mason sat, his legs giving out with relief. Dante remained standing, towering over him, a wall of muscle and authority that made Mason feel impossibly small. Let's establish some ground rules, Dante said. First, you don't leave my sight without permission. Someone asks you to go somewhere, you tell them to check with me first. Someone offers you something, you refuse and report it to me. Someone threatens you, you come directly to me. Understood? Mason nodded mutely. I need to hear you say it. I understand, Mason whispered. Second, you speak when I ask you a question. You don't volunteer information to anyone else. You don't make friends without my approval. You don't make enemies at all if you can help it. Okay, Mason said, slightly louder this time. Third, and this is important. Dante crouched down so they were eye level, and the intensity of his gaze made Mason's breath catch. I own your protection now. That means your safety is my responsibility, but it also means your choices are mine. Where you go, what you do, who you talk to, all of it goes through me first. You might not like it, but that's how you stay alive in here. And in return? Mason forced himself to ask. What do you get? Dante's expression was unreadable. In return, you do what I tell you. Whatever I tell you. Whenever I tell you. No questions, no hesitation, no resistance. The implications of those words hung heavy in the air between them. Mason's stomach twisted with fear and something else he didn't want to name. Mason started, then stopped, his face flushing. I know exactly what you are, Dante interrupted quietly. Tyler told me everything. 23 years old, first offense, never been with a man. Hell, barely been with anyone based on how you're blushing right now. Mason wanted to disappear. Wanted to wake up from this nightmare and find himself anywhere else. But Dante wasn't done. That's part of why Tyler was so eager to make this deal, Dante continued. What I'm offering him is valuable, and he knew I'd pay a premium for someone untouched. You're talking about me like I'm a thing, Mason said, anger finally cutting through the fear, like I'm property you just bought. In here, that's exactly what you are, Dante said bluntly. You can be angry about it. You can hate me for it. But it doesn't change the reality. You're mine now, Mason. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be for both of us. Mason felt tears burning behind his eyes and blinked them back furiously. He wouldn't cry. Not in front of this man. Not when everything had already been taken from him. Dante stood, his expression softening slightly. I'm not a monster, despite what you've heard. I don't hurt people who don't deserve it, and I don't take what isn't offered. But I do require obedience, loyalty, and trust. Give me those things, and I'll keep you safer than Tyler ever could. And if I can't give you those things, then we'll both have a very difficult 3 years ahead of us, Dante replied. But I'm patient, and you're going to learn that sometimes the scariest thing in here is also the safest place to be. He moved toward the cell door, then paused. Dinner is in 2 hours. I'll come get you. Until then, stay here. Don't answer the door for anyone but me. How will I know it's you? Dante's lips curved in that not quite smile again. You'll know. Then he was gone, and Mason was alone in a cell that smelled like someone else, sitting on a bunk that belonged to the most dangerous man in the prison, trying to process that his life had just been bartered away like a commodity. He lay back on the bunk, staring at the ceiling, and let the tears come. Silent, hot, full of rage and fear and helplessness. He cried for the life he'd lost, for the innocence he was about to lose, for the man he'd been 47 days ago who had no idea how quickly everything could be stripped away. When the tears finally stopped, Mason wiped his face and sat up. His reflection in the small metal mirror mounted to the wall showed him exactly what everyone else saw: young, scared, vulnerable. Everything he hated about himself in this place. But underneath the fear, something else was beginning to stir. Survival instinct, maybe. Or just stubborn refusal to completely break. He'd made it 47 days. He'd make it 3 years. Whatever it took, even if what it took was belonging to Dante Mercer. The 2 hours until dinner felt like an eternity. Mason explored the cell, which didn't take long, and inventoried what little personal items Dante kept. Photos of people Mason didn't recognize. A few books, surprisingly literary. A chess set. Nothing that gave away much about who Dante Mercer really was beneath the reputation. One photo caught Mason's attention. It showed a young woman with Dante's same intense eyes, laughing at the camera. A sister, maybe? Or someone else important enough that Dante kept her image in this terrible place. Mason picked up one of the books, Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. He flipped through it and found passages underlined, notes in the margins in handwriting that was surprisingly neat and thoughtful. The contradiction of a man who ruled through violence reading Stoic philosophy was jarring. Another book was Baldwin's Giovanni's Room. Mason had read it in college, years ago, in a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. He remembered the story: doomed love, complicated desire, The struggle between what society demanded and what the heart wanted. Why did Dante Mercer have this book? When footsteps approached the cell, Mason's entire body tensed. But he did know it was Dante. The measured, confident stride was unmistakable. Different from the guards' hurried steps or the shuffling of other inmates. Dante appeared in the doorway, surveying Mason with those penetrating dark eyes. Ready? Do I have a choice? No. At least he was honest. The walk to the dining hall was an education in power dynamics. Other inmates moved out of Dante's way without him having to say a word. Some nodded respectfully. Others averted their eyes. All of them looked at Mason with expressions ranging from curiosity to envy to pity. Mason stayed close to Dante's side, hyper-aware of the protection that massive presence provided. Without it, he'd be vulnerable. With it, he was claimed. He wasn't sure which was worse. They sat at a table in the corner where Dante clearly always sat. 4 other men were already there, part of Dante's inner circle, Mason assumed. They greeted Dante with easy familiarity and studied Mason with undisguised interest. "This is Mason," Dante said simply. "He's mine. Treat him accordingly." The men nodded, and Mason felt his face burn. The possessiveness in Dante's tone was unmistakable. Everyone at this table understood exactly what "he's mine" meant. One of the men, a massive black man with scars across his knuckles, spoke first. "I'm Jerome. Been with Dante 6 years. You need anything, you ask. You got problems, you tell me, or Dante. Simple." Another man, Latino with intelligent eyes, introduced himself as Carlos. "I handle logistics. You'll see me around." The others gave their names, Raymond and Terrell. They were polite but distant, clearly waiting to see what Mason would become in this new arrangement. Dinner was served, institutional food that somehow looked better on this side of the dining hall, and conversation flowed around Mason while he picked at his tray. He could feel eyes on him from other tables, could hear whispers. Everyone was watching, waiting to see what would happen. "Eat," Dante said quietly, and it wasn't a suggestion. Mason forced himself to take a bite, then another. Dante watched him with an intensity that made every motion feel scrutinized. Jerome leaned forward. "Tyler's already spreading stories. Says you paid a fortune for pretty boy here." "Let him talk," Dante replied calmly. "The truth is more valuable than his fiction." "And what's the truth?" Carlos asked, genuine curiosity in his tone. Dante's gaze shifted to Mason, and Mason felt pinned by that look. "The truth is, Mason needed protection he couldn't afford. I needed someone I could trust. We both got what we needed." It was a generous lie, and Mason was surprised by it. Dante could have told them the truth, that Mason had been sold, that he'd had no choice. Instead, he'd framed it as mutual benefit. Raymond, who'd been quiet until now, spoke up. "Word is your first-timer. That true?" Mason nodded, not trusting his voice. "Then let me give you some advice," Raymond continued. "This place will eat you alive if you let it. Having Dante's protection, that's like winning the lottery. Don't waste it by being stupid." "Define stupid," Mason said, finding his voice. "Thinking you can operate on your own, talking to people you shouldn't, making deals without clearing them first, trusting anyone who isn't at this table." Raymond's expression was serious. "You're in the safest position anyone like you could be in here. Don't throw it away." "Finish your food," Dante said to Mason. "We have things to discuss back at the cell." Those words shouldn't have sounded threatening, but combined with the knowing looks from the other men at the table, they made Mason's stomach clench with anxiety. The walk back to the cell felt shorter than the walk to dinner. Mason's mind raced with possibilities, with fears, with the knowledge that he was about to find out exactly what Dante expected from him. Inside the cell, Dante closed the door behind them and leaned against it. In the confined space, he seemed even larger, more imposing. Mason stood awkwardly by the bunks, unsure where to look or what to do. "You're terrified," Dante observed. "Wouldn't you be?" "Probably. But I need you to understand something, Mason. What happens between us isn't going to be what you're imagining." Mason's eyes snapped to Dante's face. "What does that mean?" "It means I didn't pay Tyler for the pleasure of forcing myself on a scared kid," Dante said bluntly. "I paid him because you needed protection, and I needed—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Someone who didn't belong to anyone else." "I don't understand." "You will." Dante pushed off from the door and crossed to his bunk, sitting down so they were closer to eye level. "Here's how this is going to work. You're mine, that's not negotiable. Everyone in this prison knows it now, which means you're protected by my reputation. But what that actually means between you and me, that's something we're going to figure out together. You're not going to—" Mason couldn't finish the sentence. "I'm not going to touch you until you ask me to," Dante said clearly. "And yes, I do mean ask." Not beg, not submit out of fear, not give in because you think you have no choice. Ask, voluntarily, because you want it. Mason stared at him in disbelief. That's never going to happen. Maybe not. But until it does, your job is simple. You share this cell with me. You follow my rules. You stay safe. That's it. Why? Mason demanded. Why would you do this if you're not going to? Because I'm tired of taking, Dante said softly, and for the first time Mason heard something other than authority in his voice. Something that sounded almost like loneliness. I've spent 10 years in here taking what I wanted because I could. Power, control, respect, I took it all. But there's one thing you can't take. One thing that only has value if it's freely given. What's that? Dante's dark eyes locked onto Mason's, and the intensity there made Mason's breath catch. Trust, Dante said. Genuine trust. The kind where someone knows you could destroy them but believes you won't. I want that, Mason. And I'm willing to wait for it. Mason didn't know what to say. This wasn't what he'd expected. Wasn't what the stories had prepared him for. I know you don't trust me yet, Dante continued. I know you're scared and angry and you feel like your life was just stolen. That's all valid. But I'm going to prove to you that the safest place in this prison is right here, with me. And maybe, eventually, you'll believe it. And if I never do? Dante shrugged. Then you'll have a very protective roommate for 3 years. I can live with that if you can. Mason wanted to believe him, wanted desperately to think that maybe this situation wasn't as horrifying as he'd feared. But he'd been betrayed once today already. Trust wasn't something he could afford anymore. I need to think, Mason said quietly. Take all the time you need. Top bunk is yours. Lights out is in an hour. Dante stood and moved to the small desk in the corner, pulling out a book. Mason climbed to the top bunk, his mind spinning. Below him, he could hear Dante turning pages, completely at ease. The man had just upended Mason's entire world, and now he was reading like it was any other evening. As darkness fell and the prison settled into its nighttime sounds, distant shouts, metal doors clanging, footsteps in corridors, Mason lay awake and tried to make sense of his new reality. He belonged to Dante Mercer now, that was fact. But what that meant was still a mystery. And despite his fear, despite his anger, despite everything rational telling him this was dangerous, a small, traitorous part of Mason was curious. Curious about the man beneath him who claimed to want trust instead of submission. Curious about what might happen if Mason actually believed him. Curious about the way Dante's voice had sounded when he'd said, I'm tired of taking. Curious about whether the most dangerous man in the prison might somehow be exactly what Mason needed to survive. Mason didn't sleep that first night. How could he? Every sound seemed amplified in the darkness. Dante's steady breathing below him, the creaks and groans of the old building, distant voices echoing through corridors. But more than the sounds, it was his racing thoughts that kept him awake. He kept replaying the moment in the yard, Tyler's betrayal, Dante's measured assessment, the transaction that had reduced Mason to property, and then Dante's unexpected words in the cell. I'm not going to touch you until you ask me to. It made no sense. Men like Dante Mercer didn't make deals like that. They didn't pay for something and then refuse to take it. Unless this was some kind of game. Unless Dante was playing a longer con that Mason couldn't see yet. But there had been something in Dante's voice when he'd talked about trust. Something that sounded almost vulnerable, though Mason couldn't imagine this man being vulnerable about anything. Below him, Dante shifted, and Mason went rigid. But all he heard was the rustle of blankets and then stillness again. You're thinking too loud. Dante's voice came from below, quiet but clear in the darkness. Mason's breath caught. I thought you were asleep. Can't sleep when someone's anxiety is practically vibrating through the bunk. There was no irritation in Dante's tone, just observation. Ask me what you want to ask. I don't, Mason. The way Dante said his name, firm but not harsh, made Mason stop. I told you I wanted trust. That starts with honesty. You have questions. Ask them. Mason stared at the ceiling, gathering courage. Why me? Why you specifically? Yes. There must be. You could have anyone. Why did Tyler think you'd want me? Dante was quiet for a moment. Come down here. What? Come down here. I'm not having this conversation shouting at the ceiling. Mason hesitated, then carefully climbed down the ladder. In the darkness, he could barely make out Dante's form on the lower bunk. Dante shifted, making room, and Mason found himself sitting on the edge of the bunk, maintaining careful distance. Tyler knew what I was looking for, Dante said. Someone who wasn't already part of the system. Someone who hadn't been corrupted by this place yet. Someone who could still see me as a person instead of just a reputation. But you paid him. You bought me like property, yes. Dante's voice was matter-of-fact. That's how things work in here. Tyler had something I wanted. I had something he needed. But Mason, understand this: what I paid him for was the right to offer you real protection. What happens after that? That's between you and me. Mason's eyes were adjusting to the darkness now. He could see Dante's profile, the strong lines of his face, the way he was looking at the ceiling rather than at Mason, giving him space. I still don't understand why you do this, Mason said quietly. Why wait for something you could just take? Because I've taken enough for one lifetime. Dante finally turned his head to look at Mason. You know what I did to get in here? Mason shook his head. I killed 3 men, not in self-defense, not by accident. I walked into a building and I killed them because they'd crossed me, because they'd threatened what was mine, because I had the power to do it and no one to stop me. Dante's voice was steady, factual, like he was reciting someone else's story. I was 24 years old and I thought power meant taking whatever I wanted whenever I wanted it. Mason didn't know what to say to that. 10 years in here, I've built an empire on that same principle, Dante continued. I took control because I could. I took respect because I was willing to be more violent than anyone else. I took everything I wanted and nobody could stop me. But taking isn't the same as having. Dante sat up and suddenly they were close in the small space. I have power in here, real power, but I don't have anything that's mine by choice. Everything I have because people are afraid to say no. Except me, Mason said, understanding dawning. You're giving me a choice. I'm giving you time, Dante corrected. Time to see that I'm not what the stories say. Time to decide if maybe what you need and what I want are the same thing. And what do you want? Dante's eyes caught what little light filtered through the cell window. I want someone who stays because they want to, not because they're afraid or because they have no choice. I want someone who trusts me enough to be honest with me. And yes, Mason, eventually I want someone who chooses to be with me physically, but not out of fear or obligation, by choice. The intimacy of sitting this close in the darkness, having this conversation, made Mason's heart race. That's a lot to want from someone you just bought. It is, Dante agreed, which is why I'm willing to wait, however long it takes. What if it takes all 3 years? Then I'll have had 3 years of knowing someone saw me as more than a monster. That's more than I've had in the last 10. Mason studied Dante's face, looking for signs of manipulation, of games. But all he saw was exhaustion. Not physical exhaustion. Dante looked like he could go rounds in a fight without breaking a sweat, but emotional exhaustion. The exhaustion of someone who'd been performing strength for so long they'd forgotten what it felt like to just be. I don't know if I can give you what you want, Mason said honestly. Then we'll find out together. Dante gestured to the top bunk. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Mason climbed back up, but this time when he lay down, his mind was quieter. He still didn't understand Dante Mercer, still didn't trust him, but maybe, just maybe, he believed that Dante meant what he'd said. He drifted off thinking about trust and choices and the strange mercy of being given time. The next morning began with a routine that Mason would come to know intimately over the following weeks. Wake-up call at 6. Dante was already awake, dressed, sitting on his bunk reading. He looked up when Mason climbed down. Bathroom's at the end of the hall, Dante said. You go, you come right back. Don't talk to anyone. Don't stop for anyone. Understand? Mason nodded. Say it. I understand. The bathroom was communal, several sinks, several shower stalls with flimsy curtains, toilets with minimal privacy. Mason kept his eyes down, did what he needed to do, and returned to the cell as instructed. Dante was waiting. Breakfast is in 30 minutes. Before we go, we need to talk about how this works. He laid out the rules clearly, where Mason could go, where he couldn't, who he could talk to, who he should avoid, how to respond if someone approached him, what to do if there was trouble. You stay in my sight as much as possible, Dante said. When we're in areas I control, you have more freedom. But in common areas, yard, dining hall, workshop, you stay close. What if I need to use the bathroom during the day? You tell me first. I'll send someone with you. Mason bristled. I can't even use the bathroom alone? Not until everyone in here understands that touching you means war with me. Dante's expression was serious. Give it a few weeks. Once the message is clear, you'll have more freedom. Breakfast was similar to dinner. Dante's table, his inner circle, careful observation of Mason. But this time, Carlos engaged him in conversation. You work yet? Carlos asked. Mason shook his head. Not assigned anywhere. You will be. Everyone works. What'd you do outside? I was in college. Business administration. Carlos's eyebrows rose. Educated. That's useful. Dante, you thinking library? Office work? Maybe, Dante said, his attention on his food but clearly listening. What do you want to do, Mason? It was the first time anyone had asked Mason what he wanted since he'd arrived. I don't know. What are the options? Kitchen, laundry, workshop, library, maintenance, Jerome listed. Library's easiest physically. Workshop pays better in commissary credits. Kitchen gets you extra food if you're smart about it. Library, Dante decided. I'll arrange it. Keeps him in a controlled environment. Mason wanted to argue that he should decide his own work assignment, but he understood the logic. The library would be quieter, fewer inmates, more supervision. After breakfast, Dante walked Mason back to the cell. I have business to handle this morning. You're staying here. For how long? Few hours. There's books, there's paper if you want to write. Just stay put. Dante paused at the door. You going to be okay? Mason nodded, though he wasn't sure it was true. Hey! Dante stepped closer, and Mason fought the urge to back away. I know this is strange. I know you're scared. But I meant what I said last night. You're safe here. With me. Then he was gone, and Mason was alone with his thoughts. The days began to blur into a routine. Wake up, breakfast, work assignment at the library, lunch, yard time with Dante always nearby, dinner, evening in the cell. Through it all, Dante maintained that careful distance. He never touched Mason unless necessary, a hand on his shoulder to guide him, a brief contact to get his attention. Nothing more. But Mason became hyper-aware of Dante's presence, the way he moved through the prison like he owned it, the respect or fear he commanded from everyone, the intelligence behind those dark eyes that noticed everything. In the library, Mason started actually reading instead of just shelving books. He found himself drawn to the philosophy section, to the same kinds of books he'd seen in Dante's cell. He wondered if Dante had read all of these, what he thought about them. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after the transfer, Mason was sitting in the library during a quiet period when Dante appeared. This was unusual. Dante rarely came to Mason's work assignment. Walk with me, Dante said. They walked through corridors Mason had never seen, deeper into the administrative wing. Dante stopped outside an office and knocked. Come in, a voice called. It was the warden's office. Mason's stomach dropped. But Dante guided him inside with a hand on his lower back, that brief touch both possessive and reassuring. Warden Morrison looked up from his desk. He was in his 50s, gray hair, tired eyes. Mercer, and this must be Reed. Sir, Dante said respectfully. Morrison studied Mason for a long moment. You settling in all right, son? Mason glanced at Dante, unsure how to answer. Dante gave the slightest nod. Yes, sir, Mason said. Good, good. Morrison leaned back in his chair. Mercer here tells me you've got an education. Business administration? Yes, sir. I was a junior in college when I was arrested. Would you like to finish your degree? Mason blinked. I'm sorry? We have educational programs, associate's degrees, some bachelor's programs through partner universities, online courses, proctored exams. You interested? Yes, sir. I'd be very interested. Morrison nodded. Mercer's offered to sponsor you. Cover any cost the prison doesn't. He says you're bright, motivated. That true? Mason looked at Dante, who was carefully not looking at him. He said that? He did. So what do you say, Reed? Want to make something of your time in here? Yes, sir. Absolutely. They discussed logistics, what credits Mason had, what he'd need to complete his degree, how the program worked. By the time they left the warden's office, Mason's head was spinning. In the corridor, he stopped walking. Why did you do that? Dante turned to face him. Do what? Arrange this. Offer to pay for my education. Why? You're going to be here for 3 years, Mason. You can either waste that time or use it. I thought you might want to use it. But why do you care? Dante was quiet for a moment. Because you're mine to protect. That includes protecting your future, not just your present. It was the first truly generous thing someone had done for Mason since his arrest. His public defender had been overworked and uninterested. His family had been ashamed and distant. Tyler had protected him only to sell him later. But Dante, the man who'd bought him like property, was offering him a future. Thank you, Mason said quietly. Something shifted in Dante's expression, something that might have been pleasure or satisfaction, or maybe just surprise. You're welcome. Come on, let's get back before everyone thinks I've gone soft. That night in the cell, Mason found himself watching Dante more carefully, noticing small things. The way Dante's brow furrowed when he concentrated on reading, the methodical way he maintained his space, keeping everything neat and ordered, the surprising gentleness in his hands when he handled his chess pieces, setting up problems to solve. You play? Dante asked without looking up, apparently sensing Mason's gaze. Chess? Not really. I know the rules, but I was never any good. Come down here. I'll teach you. Mason climbed down and they sat across from each other with the board between them. Dante explained strategy, showed him openings, walked him through a game where Dante could have crushed him, but instead made it educational. You're thinking too much about individual pieces, Dante said after Mason made a move. See the whole board. Every piece affects every other piece. It's about patterns, about position, about understanding what your opponent wants, and denying them that while pursuing your own goals. Sounds like prison politics, Mason observed. Dante smiled, a real smile this time, not his usual controlled expression. Everything's chess once you know how to look at it. They played for an hour, and Mason lost badly, but felt like he'd learned something. Not just about chess. Same time tomorrow? Dante asked as Mason prepared to climb back to his bunk. Okay. It became their routine. After dinner, chess. Sometimes Dante taught, sometimes they just played. They talked about strategy at first, then about other things. Books they'd read, things they'd seen, carefully skirting around the big topics: why they were here, what their lives had been before, what they wanted for after. 3 weeks after the transfer, something happened that tested everything Dante had promised. Mason was in the library, reshelling books, when someone approached him from behind. He felt the presence before he heard the voice. Pretty thing like you, all alone. Mason turned to find the man from the yard, the one who'd been watching him the day Tyler and Dante made their deal. Up close, he was even more unsettling. Older, maybe 45, with calculating eyes. I'm not alone, Mason said, trying to keep his voice steady. Dante ain't here right now, is he? The man moved closer, backing Mason against the shelves. Been watching you, wondering what's so special that Mercer paid what he did. Maybe I should find out for myself. Mason's heart hammered. The library was mostly empty, just a trustee working at the desk who was carefully not noticing what was happening. No help there. Dante's got business with the warden. Won't be back for at least an hour. The man reached out, touching Mason's face. Plenty of time. Mason jerked away, but there was nowhere to go. The shelves blocked him in. The man was bigger, stronger, and clearly didn't care about consequences. Then a voice, cold and deadly, cut through the air. Step away from him. Now. Dante appeared at the end of the row, and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. His expression was calm, but there was murder in his eyes. The older man immediately stepped back, hands raised. Mercer was just talking to the boy. You were touching what's mine. Dante moved forward, each step measured and terrifying. I thought everyone understood the rules. Come on, Mercer. I didn't mean. Dante moved so fast Mason barely saw it. One moment he was 3 feet away. The next his hand was wrapped around the man's throat, slamming him back against the opposite shelf. Books tumbled to the floor. When I say something is mine, I mean it, Dante said quietly, his voice somehow more frightening for its calm. You touch him. You look at him too long. You even think about him in ways you shouldn't. You answer to me. Am I clear? The man was turning red, clawing at Dante's hand. Dante held him there for another moment, making his point, then released him. The man collapsed, gasping. Spread the word, Dante said. Mason Reed is off limits. Anyone who forgets that will wish they'd taken their chances with the guards instead. He turned to Mason, his expression shifting immediately from deadly to concerned. You okay? Mason nodded, not trusting his voice. Come on. You're done with work for today. They walked back to the cell in silence. Mason's hands were shaking. He'd just seen exactly how dangerous Dante could be, how violence lived just beneath that controlled surface. In the cell, Dante closed the door and turned to Mason. Talk to me. You could have killed him, Mason said quietly. Yes, but you didn't. No, because killing him would have caused more problems than it solved. But make no mistake, Mason, I would have if he'd hurt you. Mason sat on the lower bunk, processing. Is that what you do? Hurt people who cross you? Dante sat beside him, maintaining that careful distance. I do what's necessary to maintain order, to protect what's mine. Do I like it? No, but it's the language this place understands. I'm not sure I can handle this, Mason admitted. Seeing that side of you, knowing what you're capable of. I've never pretended to be harmless, Dante said. But Mason, look at me. Mason did, meeting those dark eyes. What happened in that library, that's what I protect you from. Every single day. There are men in here who would do far worse than that if they thought they could. But they can't, because of me. Because of what I'm willing to do to keep you safe. I know. Mason struggled to articulate the confusion of feelings churning in his chest. Fear, yes. but also something that felt uncomfortably like relief, like gratitude. "You're scared of me now," Dante said, and there was something like resignation in his voice. "I understand that. I knew you would see this side eventually." "I'm not scared of you," Mason said, surprising himself. "I'm scared of what you're capable of, but not of you. Does that make sense?" Dante studied him for a long moment. "It does. More than you know." They sat in silence for a while, just existing in the same space, processing what had happened, what it meant. "He won't bother you again," Dante said finally. "No one will. That message is out now." "Thank you," Mason said quietly, "for protecting me. Always." That night, Mason lay in his bunk thinking about violence and protection, about fear and safety, about the strange contradiction of Dante Mercer, a man who read philosophy and played chess with patience, a man who could kill without hesitation if needed, a man who'd bought Mason's protection but refused to take anything Mason didn't offer. Below him, Dante's breathing was steady, calm, and for the first time since arriving at Wardlow, Mason felt something other than terror. He felt protected. The weeks continued to pass, and slowly, carefully, Mason began to relax. Not completely, this was prison, and that was impossible, but enough that he could breathe easier. Enough that he could focus on his coursework when it started. Enough that he could sometimes go hours without remembering that his life had been traded away. Dante continued to surprise him. He helped Mason with his business courses, revealing a sharp mind for strategy and systems. He never pushed for more than chess games and conversation. He maintained those careful boundaries that should have felt like protection but were starting to feel like something else. Like distance Mason was beginning to resent. It was a dangerous thought. Mason knew that. Getting attached to Dante meant accepting this situation, accepting his own powerlessness, accepting that his life belonged to someone else. But living in close quarters with someone, sharing space and time and increasingly personal conversations, it wore down resistance. One evening, about 6 weeks after the transfer, they were playing chess when Mason asked a question he'd been avoiding. "Why are you really doing this? And don't tell me it's about trust. What do you actually want from me?" Dante didn't answer immediately. He moved his bishop, capturing Mason's knight, then sat back. "I want someone who sees me," Dante said finally. "Really sees me. Not the reputation, not the violence, not the power, just me." "I don't even know who just you is," Mason said. "Everything I know about you is filtered through what you want me to see." "Then ask. Whatever you want to know, ask." Mason took the invitation. "The photo in here. The woman. Who is she?" Pain flickered across Dante's face. "My sister, Amara. She was 19 when I got locked up. 29 now. Married, 2 kids I've never met." "Does she visit?" "No. I told her not to. Didn't want this place touching her life more than it already had." Dante's voice was carefully neutral, but Mason could hear the loneliness underneath. "Do you regret it? What you did to get in here?" "Every single day. But regret doesn't change anything. All you can do is try to be better than you were." "Is that what you're doing? Trying to be better?" Dante met his eyes. "Yes, starting with you." The intensity of that gaze made Mason's breath catch. There was want there, carefully controlled but undeniable. Dante wanted him, had wanted him from the beginning, but he was holding back, maintaining those boundaries, giving Mason the choice he'd promised. "I don't know if I can give you what you want," Mason said quietly. "I know, but I'm still willing to wait." 2 months after the transfer, Mason had his first real test of trust. He got sick, nothing serious, just a bad cold that had him feverish and miserable. The prison medical system was a joke, but Dante somehow got real medicine, made sure Mason had extra blankets, brought him soup from the kitchen that wasn't the usual slop. Mason spent 2 days mostly sleeping, aware of Dante's presence below him. At one point, burning up with fever, he woke to find Dante sitting on the edge of his bunk, placing a cool cloth on his forehead. "You don't have to do this," Mason mumbled. "I know. Sleep." When Mason was better, he realized something had shifted. Dante had taken care of him when he was at his most vulnerable. Could have done anything while Mason was half conscious with fever. But he hadn't. Had just been gentle and patient and careful. "Thank you," Mason said one evening after he'd recovered. They were sitting across from each other with the chessboard between them, but neither was really paying attention to the game. "For what?" "For taking care of me." "For not," Mason gestured vaguely. "For not taking advantage?" "Yes." Dante leaned forward, his expression serious. "Mason, I need you to understand something. I will never touch you without permission. Not when you're sick, not when you're scared, not when you're vulnerable. Never. That's not what I want." "What do you want?" "I want you to want me back," Dante said simply. "I want you to look at me and see someone worth choosing. Not because you're afraid or obligated or have no choice. Because you actually want to." Mason's heart was pounding. They were treading into dangerous territory now. "I don't know if I'm capable of that," Mason admitted. "Wanting someone who bought me. Then we'll keep waiting until you figure it out." Dante moved a chess piece, changing the subject. "Your move." But Mason couldn't focus on chess anymore. He was too busy processing the realization that had just hit him. He was starting to care about Dante Mercer, not out of fear or obligation, but because over the past 2 months, Dante had shown him kindness, patience, and a kind of gentle restraint that made him feel safe in a way he'd never expected, and that terrified him more than anything else in this place. 3 months after the transfer, something broke. It started with a letter from Mason's family, the first contact he'd had since his arrest. His mother had written to say they were moving on with their lives. They'd prefer he not contact them anymore. They were ashamed, and his presence in their lives, even from prison, was too painful. Mason read the letter once, then sat on his bunk staring at nothing. He felt hollowed out, empty, like the last thread connecting him to his old life had just been severed. Dante came back from somewhere and immediately noticed something was wrong. What happened? Mason handed him the letter without a word. Dante read it, and something dangerous crossed his face. "They're fools. They're ashamed of me. Then they don't deserve you." Dante sat beside him on the bunk. "Mason, look at me." Mason did, and found concern in Dante's eyes. Real, genuine concern. What they think, what they feel, that's about them, not you. You're not defined by their shame or their inability to see your worth. "I have no one," Mason said, and his voice broke. "My family's done with me. My friends abandoned me. I have no one outside these walls who gives a damn if I'm alive or dead. You have me." The simplicity of that statement, the certainty in Dante's voice, broke something in Mason. He started crying deep, wrenching sobs that he'd been holding back for months. All the fear and loneliness and grief came pouring out. And Dante, this man who'd bought him, this man who ruled through violence and fear, this man who terrified everyone around him, Dante pulled Mason into his arms and just held him. "I've got you," Dante murmured against Mason's hair. "You're not alone. I've got you." Mason clung to him, crying into Dante's shoulder, feeling those strong arms around him like a shelter from everything awful in the world. And for the first time since being arrested, he felt like maybe he could survive this. Maybe he could get through 3 years in this place. Because Dante was right. He wasn't alone. When the tears finally stopped, Mason pulled back, embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have." "Don't apologize for being human," Dante said firmly. His hands were still on Mason's shoulders, warm and steady. "You're allowed to feel things. You're allowed to be hurt. And you're allowed to let someone comfort you." Mason looked at Dante's face, really looked at him. Saw the man beneath the reputation. The man who played chess and read philosophy. The man who'd been patient for 3 months, waiting for Mason to see him. And Mason realized with startling clarity that he did see him. Saw Dante Mercer, not the prison king. Saw someone lonely and trying to be better. Saw someone who'd chosen to be gentle when he could have been brutal. Saw someone he was starting to trust. "Dante," Mason said quietly. "Yes? Thank you for everything." Something shifted in Dante's expression, hope, maybe, or recognition that something had changed between them, always. They sat like that for a long moment, close enough to feel each other's warmth, hands still touching, looking at each other with new understanding. Mason didn't know what would happen next. Didn't know if he'd ever be able to give Dante what he wanted. But he knew that somewhere over the past 3 months, Dante had stopped being his captor and had become something else. Something that felt uncomfortably close to home. That night, lying in his bunk, Mason thought about trust and choice, and the strange mercy of being given time. He thought about how Dante had held him while he cried, offered comfort without expecting anything in return. How Dante had been patient for 3 months, never pushing, never taking, just waiting. And Mason wondered if maybe, eventually, he might choose to close the distance between them. Not because he had to, not because he was afraid of what would happen if he didn't, but because Dante Mercer, the most dangerous man in Wardlow Correctional, had somehow become the safest place Mason had ever known. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like the first honest thing he'd felt in months. Below him, Dante's breathing was steady and calm, and Mason fell asleep thinking that maybe, just maybe, trust was something you could build even in the darkest places. Even between two people who'd started with a transaction, but were becoming something more. Something neither of them had planned for, but both of them desperately needed. The future was uncertain. 3 years stretched ahead, full of unknowns. But tonight, for the first time since arriving at Wardlow, Mason felt something other than fear or resignation. He felt possibility, and that was enough.